Hi everyone, my name is Blair Sinta. How are you? This is the first in a series of interviews I've done with some drumming recording friends. This one is with Brendan Buckley. Brendan and I have known each other for about 20 years now, and he lives fairly close to me, and he's a great drummer in general. He has a home studio like I do. He works a lot out of there, and I thought it would be interesting to learn some processes that Brendan uses, some of his history of recording, how he got started. Everyone seems to have different ways how they got into this, and why. Brendan and I have shared a lot of gigs over the years, road gigs. We actually were in the same band at different times at a certain period here in LA. And he's been Shakira's drummer for well over 25 years, maybe 25 years, and he's been the only drummer. I'm proud to say that I was able to sit in and do some fake drumming with Shakira one time, thanks to Brendan. And there was lots of fire around. That was fun. But this is I think it's a really good conversation to get inside Brendan's head and see how he gets a lot of these great drum sounds and records for artists around the world throughout his home studio from here in Los Angeles. If you're interested in any of the gear that Brendan is talking about, I have a link to Sweetwater Sound below, and pretty much anything you can get there through that link. If you're interested in my 5 fundamentals to studio drumming, there is also a link below. This is a lesson, basically a free lesson of 5 things that I use for my studio playing and live playing, things I've practiced for years, things I continue to work on, and it really helps a lot of things that are important for drummers to be great studio and live players. And that's a free lesson. You can hit that link below. If you have questions about the interview, please leave some questions in the comments below and I will get back to you. Or if there's something for Brendan, I'll have him get back to you, or I'll ask him. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. This is the first of a few coming up.
So were you actually recording yourself in Miami?
Oh, sure. But we've started, right?
Well, I think we just started, yeah.
Yes, in Miami, definitely. But I would say, even when I was in high school in New Jersey, I would set up like an SM58 over my drum set and play into a 4-track recorder,
Okay.
and like play with my high school band where the bassist would record on one track and the guitarist record another. And
Right.
so
You were running that? Like you were the guy that was doing that? It wasn't like the guitar player or whatever?
I think we all learned how to do it.
Yeah.
Everyone learned how to do it. Like the whole idea, I mean, the prior to that, recording was you set up a boom box in your garage and everyone just plays and you push record on a cassette. And then the next level was, you know what you can do? They have these cassette machines where you can layer.
Right.
Like, really? They're called 4-tracks and you can do like 4 parts.
Right.
And apparently that's how the Beatles did their records. So for some reason, you would get these little Tascam Porta Studios, and I imagine that that's what the Beatles used to make their records.
Right.
Then you see their actual 4-track machines; they're totally different thing. But yeah, when I was in high school, it didn't seem like you're making a record, and it was just a way for you to record music with your buddies, and they had these super affordable 4-track machines, and that's really my entrance into both recording drums and producing was through that stuff.
Right. It's funny you're totally jogging by memory because I had totally forgotten about doing the same thing with my bands. But I was never the guy with the 4-track. But then the first band I was in, or really the band I was in high school, there was some guys that were older than me. One guy had an older brother, and they literally built a studio in a loft in Saline, Michigan. And I was in there, when I was 16 and we were recording songs, and it was like, full on a board. And I remember him showing me like, this is what a compressor can do. And they had recorded a shaker and it was ducking in and out with the kick and snare.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept trying to explain it to me. And I was like what? I don't get why I still don't understand why it's doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like I had forgotten about that early time of recording.
Mm-hmm.
Me, like I was like, for me, it goes back to like 1999. I was like, wait, I want to start to record myself. It's like, no, there were actually 4 tracks and
Yeah, Those were our training wheels.
Yeah, exactly.
You learn things like, I mean, when you learn how to bounce, you would learn things like, okay, now I want to do like some shaker and tambourine, and now I can put this on there. But you bounce it, and you don't want, one of the volumes to be way loud because you can't ever go back.
Right.
You really make sure the volumes are correct. Or you learn things like overdubbing, for instance. What if the acoustic guitarist lays his part first, and then you're supposed to play drums to that? That's really difficult.
Right.
Without a click track, that's really difficult. So you would say, hey, why don't we do the drum part first,
Right.
and then we'll do the bass and guitar to that? And like in high school, these are things you're discovering through trial and error.
Right.
Like things like, well, this is the section where the drums drop out, and so maybe you should play like a hi-hat or something so we can keep some time.
Right.
It's basic stuff, but you learn these things through experimenting with those 4-tracks back then.
Right. And the idea of going back to correct anything was not even on the table.
Yeah, you had to start over again.
Just did it.
You just did a whole other version.
Yeah, we're going to play the song now, and here it is. Like, should we play the whole thing again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, and then, I mean, not to jump too far ahead, but when I was in Miami and I was recording a lot more in studios, but the studios still had 2-inch reel-to-reel tapes, which at the time, maybe you can fit, two, depending on the quality you're using, the speed of the machine, you can fit maybe 2 songs on a reel or something.
Right.
So then you really had, and reels costed money, the tape.
Right.
So then you had to decide when you did one song and you're like, I think I could do it better. And then they say, well, can you do it better? Like, should we record over the last one?
Yeah.
Because we're not going to do 18 takes. We're going to go with one take, just whichever one you think. And you had to decide yourself as the drummer, am I willing to record over that last take to do a new one, or is the last one good enough? And
so was that part of the college curriculum you were recording, or that was doing outside work, but you were living there?
Well, good question. Yeah, we did have at the University of Miami, the school I went to, we did have a music engineering department. So there were guys who were going and studying to be engineers. And what they would do is they would pull musicians from the School of Music into the studio on these late night sessions from like midnight to 6 in the morning. And we would practice. They'd say, like, either come up with some originals or play some covers. And, we did get a lot of experience because it was a real studio. And people they were students. So they were just messing around with techniques they learned in class. So we did get practice there too. But I think what I was talking about was right after college, maybe 1997 or something, where I was recording a lot in a few studios that producers had. And they didn't want to waste 2-inch tape. So, they would ask you to play a song and you'd get it and they'd be like, cool. And I'm like, I think I could do it better. They're like, are you sure? Because I'm going to tape over the last one if you want to do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to me because in my college experience, it's like the recording, there were definitely some studios around, but I think the cultural difference probably between being in North Texas and Miami, there was no pop sessions unless you had a band, and I do remember vaguely going to a friend's garage with a band I was in and recording there. But the idea of recording when I was in school was not really, it wasn't even really in my mind. I mean, it was just like about playing and playing out, and that's practicing and playing out.
There is an element to being a drummer where it's just fun to play the drums and not have to worry about anything else. I mean, there's so much when it comes to drumming that is just like getting your technique together and getting songs together and all that stuff, that really adding on the whole idea of tuning and microphones and
what does your snare sound like? I mean,
being a session guy is a whole other skill set that is sometimes overwhelming in the beginning. But if you have that kind of macro vision of drumming, like as an entire like rhythmic delivery service or something lame like that, but basically like it's like
that's on my business card, man. You can't use that.
But if you think like not only do I have to be a drummer and have drums, but I also have to get it to an audience somehow. I either have to play a live show or I have to play on a recording that's going to get to people's ears. And then you think about that whole process, then it makes a little more sense. And you kind of learn the different stages and you get familiar with each stage, like the recording, the mixing, everything. And it was a lot harder in the past to have experience in all of those stages. And now, as you can see, we're both sitting in our studios. It gets a little easier over each generation to kind of dabble in each element of the process.
Right. So let me remember correctly. You moved to LA in 2001, 2002,
Or
2004. Really?
yeah. And then when I moved to LA, you were one of the first people I called. Because I didn't know that many people here, but I knew you, and you're like, "Hey, man, come over. I have a studio. We'll hang." So that was your old house, not this one. That was in a garage. But I remember that was totally nice for me to be pretty new to the scene. I mean, weeks in LA, and you're like, "Come over, let's hang." And I thought that was, you know, a nice display of not only you as a person and a confident drummer and generous person, but also just the LA music scene in general wasn't as like competitively evil as I imagined it would be. It was very open and warm and generous. And I'm like, wow, this is really nice, you know?
Right.
And I feel like it's getting more and more isolated
Right.
over the years, music and music making and music hanging. And yeah, that reminds me, when I did live in Miami, I rented a house with a guitarist named Adam Zimmon, who you're friends with. We were roommates for 8 years, and we had this gigantic house that we paid hardly any money for. It was like ridiculous. And we basically created the entire back of the house was just a music room, which had a recording studio, makeshift recording studio, but it was also a rehearsal room with a PA.
Oh, wow.
And every instrument you needed to jam. So it was just like, you can just come over and we could jam, rehearse, record, write, whatever. It was this kind of music den that we don't have the space in LA to make something like that.
So when did you move into that house? With Adam? What year was that?
So I became friends with Adam around 1995, and then we were roommates, I think, in 96 or 7.
Okay, so you
and we
started
had a,
kind of like collect gear then.
yeah, because fortunately at the time we had an extremely low overhead. We were both bachelors, and we were working a lot in Miami, so we would just make money, and then we get out like a Sweetwater catalog and just circle things.
Oh, wow.
Collectively, we'd be like, hey, maybe we should get a good microphone, or maybe we should get some PA speakers, or maybe we should get,
Okay.
and we just built gear. And like,
so what was your first thing that you were recording through? Was it like I'm trying to remember, there was that Roland digital.
yeah, I'm going to show you. So I'm going to pull out some photos then.
Right.
So I did this because you were like, hey, let's talk about old gear. So, and I like old gear. So
Old.
This was one of those 4-tracks that I had in high school. This is a Yamaha MT100.
Okay.
So it's one of those things, if you've never seen any of this stuff before, like if you're on the younger side of this generation, you have a little cassette recorder and 4 volume faders. So you can do 4 tracks, and you can bounce and combine and stuff like that. But then I got this one. This is a Tascam 244, which you can't see because of the photo got cropped, but there's VU meters here and everything. This thing I still have, and it sounds great, and drums sound great through this, surprisingly. It just, I've done demos on this and recordings that are actually on albums because it sounded so good. We didn't recreate it. We just kept it. I just printed this. And then what I would do is I would run maybe my drums through one of these, like a Mackie 1202 VLZ, which is just a mixer, which has mini preamps up here.
Yep.
And, so I would run maybe 4, like a kick snare and stereo overheads through that, and then I would put it into one of these as a mono track or a stereo track or something like that.
Yep.
And then when that wasn't enough, I upgraded to this thing, which is what you were talking about, the Roland VS880.
That's what it is. Yep.
You can have like 8 tracks, and then you can record to a hard disk. The thing had a hard disk in there, and you can do bouncing. And again, I did recordings on this that are on like major label albums because they were like, well, sounds good, why redo it? And it had like it had an onboard compression that was great.
Yep.
You know how to use compression. I would just turn it on or off. and it
Right.
sounded great. So I'm like,
There's that thing. Yeah. Did this get you thinking about like drum tones then? Or was it more like, hey, just put the microphones up and I'm going to make sure I play the part and like.
Definitely drum tones. I know you think this way. A lot of good advice for recording drummers is put up one microphone first and learn how to play with that.
Yeah.
If you can make drums sound good through one microphone, then you add another one, and then you add another one. Because if your crashes are too loud, or your rim shots too loud, or something, or your tom fills are too soft, or something, your internal balance is off, and it's not going to record well.
Yep.
So I learned a lot about internal balance, playing with minimal miking, like not bashing the crashes, or what crashes I'm going to use. I'm going to use super thin ones, super heavy ones, bright, dark. If I'm going open hi-hat, am I doing that open hi-hat, or am I doing that kind of sizzly open hi-hat thing? And tuning a snare drum, sizes of toms, head choices, amount of muffling in a bass drum.
You were thinking about stuff in the late 90s?
Oh, yeah. And it was only because I would be horrified with the sounds I was getting, and I was trying to figure out why it doesn't sound the way I want it to.
That's amazing to me because, my gear collection didn't even start until kind of the early 2000s. I had like one kit and maybe 2 sets of cymbals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a couple snare drums, right? But it was like, I was definitely thought about snare tone, but the idea of changing cymbals and things like that didn't occur to me until much later, which obviously is the evolution of your recording experience, right? So I had friends that were running that stuff when I lived in a house in Van Nuys when I moved here in 96, 97, 98, but I still wasn't thinking that way. To me, it was like, get the part out, so that's amazing to me that you were thinking about that stuff way back then,
Yeah, and I don't think it was that I was an expert in any of those areas. I was just more confused as to why I couldn't get the sounds I wanted or get the sounds I was hearing. Like, how come my snare goes pong and that snare I want goes zh. I'm like, why does that go zh? And mine goes pong, and I'm like, so I tried to figure it out over time. Like, is it the microphone? Is it the tuning? Is it the head, or whatever? And doing a lot of reading. And back then I used to read a lot of modern drummers, which would guys would talk about the whatever they used on this recording and that recording, and I make note, oh, a lot of guys use this microphone, or a lot of guys use this snare drum, but that can be misleading too, because you go down this world of like getting what everyone else uses, and it doesn't sound right. You can't just buy stuff that other people use expecting it to sound that way. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, exactly. That's like having a digital like a saved sound. Like, here's the Chris Lord Algae snare drum, and then you put it on yours and you're like, that doesn't sound like anything like it says it's going to sound like. It's like, right, because everything else is different except that setting.
Yeah. I'm over the years, I've always been this way, but over the years I've become more and more of a proponent of not chasing gear, whether it's like a drum set or a cymbal or a snare drum or a microphone or a preamp or anything. It's just get tools that work for you, and don't worry as much if it's the $3,500 thing that this guy uses on album, or the thing that these guys used on this classic recording in 1970. It's just we're not all in a position where we should just be collecting gear all the time. It's more about getting tools to get your ideas out, so that could be done expensively or cheaply. And I've been through processes of buying gear just because I read someone recommending it, and I've learned over and over again, it doesn't really help that much. It's more just get things that you need when you need them.
Right.
Like, I need a piccolo snare drum. I'm going to get one. I'm not going to get one because everyone told me I need one. I'm going to get one because I feel right now that's the sound I'm looking for. That's the response I want right now this year.
Right.
And it's the same thing with microphones. You can go down, you can have dozens and dozens of microphones and never be entirely happy, or never have the full collection. So just get the ones you need at that time to complete the projects you need to do. If you need 4 mics, 8 mics, something for your kick, something for your snare, something for your overhead, something for your toms. And then you slowly over time say, I don't really love my kick mic, but don't just go out and spend, 15 grand because you read somewhere that that's what everyone uses, because
Right.
it's not going to help that much.
So are there some recordings, you said some of those early recordings made it onto records. Are there some that you're still pretty sonically happy with? Did anything survive, like that you're like, it was pretty good for what I was doing then?
You know what? I mean, I don't go back and listen to anything, but I'm pretty sure I would feel like more of like a happy nostalgia as opposed to a wincing, like, oh my God, what were we thinking?
Sure.
Because again, I'm not. I accept that myself in 1995 is different than my 2001 version of myself, and whatever. It's all a process. So I do have a funny story about that. Is that I once had a meeting with a producer, and he wanted to use me on a couple recordings, but he wanted to meet me first. I'm like, cool, no problem. And he was like, can you bring over some examples of some stuff you've done? I'm like, okay. So this, back when CDs were around, I burned a CD of like 8 tracks that I had played on over the last couple of years, and I brought it and went to a studio. He put in the CD. He goes, let me hear what you got, and I played him some major label recordings I did, some things that were done in really enormous like hit factories and things like that. And then the last song was something I had done at home for a friend's band on that VS 880 with 4 microphones, through a Mackie 1202 VLZ into that, stereo drums. And when that song came on, he's like, whoa, now this is the one. I love this. That's a real drum sound. He goes, we got to do something like that. And I was like, oh, that's the one I did at home in my back patio with like, a Shure SM57 and whatever. But in his mind, it's like all the expensive things and all the fancy mastered stuff sounded kind of boring. And the one thing I did, like do-it-yourself version, was the one that jumped out. So it made me say that it's not the price tag, on the recordings that makes a big difference.
It's the vibe. It had the vibe.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, it's why I like reading that. What's the spacing right now? The name of that magazine, the Tape Op. Yeah, I love reading Tape Op because it kind of champions the idea of like, it doesn't have to be super expensive to be great.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, my gear buying stopped a long time ago. My audio gear buying, I should say. Well, my drum buying gear too. And it got to the point where I was like, man, if I can't do it with what I have, it ain't going to happen, And I think I've even gone backwards in a certain way where, like, if I can use less mics, I will. I usually get permission from a client, like, hey, can I do this with less? Because I think it'll sound better that way. But the idea of actually using less and trying to capture that vibe in the sound is like the thing, as opposed to like, yeah, you don't really need all these. I mean, I'll send you all the mics, but like, I'm going to use 4 of these, out of the 12 that are happening.
Yeah, and that takes confidence as a drummer and engineer to be able to say, I can give you everything you need with only 4 mics. You don't need the the bottom hi-hat mic or whatever, you don't need everything,
Are you doing that these days?
It's like people will mic everything.
Right.
Top and bottom ride. You
Yeah.
need 2 ride mics? Really?
Yeah.
Uh,
The two tom thing, I've never, top and bottom tom thing, it's always frightened me. I don't have enough mic pre's to do it anyway, but
Yeah.
the idea of that with phase and tone has always scared the crap out of me. I'm like, I'm not even going to attempt that, even though I'm sure it's very valid for certain types of recording.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Me.
That's one thing that's, I think, cool about your approach to drumming, which I think you're about a mile ahead of me in this department, is you're really much better at nailing drum tones from different eras. Like I can approximate. If someone says, give me that kind of Stax thing, I could do a Stax thing. Give me that, whatever, Eagles, Don Henley thing, I can do that. Or I'm thinking more of like a 90s rock thing, I can do that. But I feel like you've actually kind of studied a little more of what goes into making that drum sound that way. And I think that's pretty cool. Like whatever, the studios they used and the gear they used at the time and the drum tuning they used at the time. So you can get even closer to that. And I think that's pretty cool.
I'm not sure. I mean, thank you. First of all, thank you.
Mhm.
Not all of it I know quite as well as you're talking about, but I mean, one piece of advice that my friend Alex Gibson gave to me, and you may know him. He used to work at Henson Studios, and he lives in Florida now. Great engineer. And I was just asking him, like, "Hey, man, how do I get better?" And he was like, he said, "Well, I was specifically talking about, I was thinking about trying to get into producing more, and I was like, man, but I don't know, about how to record a guitar as well or vocalists or whatever." And he goes, "What you should do is, you know." try to recreate a Stone song. Like get together with your friends and try to just match those tones and like, just do it for fun. Like, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. So I never actually went down the full band route about that, but
Mhm.
that planted a seed with me where when I listened to like when the levee breaks, I'm like, okay, they did that with 3 microphones. Like I should be able to do that. Like why
Mhm.
can I like there's not that many elements involved besides a castle that I don't have. You know what I mean? So can I do this? And
Mhm.
that's really what became kind of the challenge to me, just to learn.
Mhm.
And then those things, and man, just such surprising things with EQ came out about that for me. I mean, not just that particular one, but any of those. Like, oh, I can crank something like 12 dB, like the high end on something. Okay, I guess
Mhm.
that's okay because now it sounds right,
Mhm.
or cutting things out instead of adding, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so, those things, I mean, I think it's just come from like obsessing, you know what I mean? Just to have and having the time to just sit here and go like, I'm gonna spend 4 days and try to get this sound,
Yeah, and
and
uh,
going back and forth.
again, we talk about the stages. You can also, if you like when the levee breaks, you can say, I want to learn how to play like Bonham. I want to learn how to play with that beat, and I want to learn how to play with that feel. And then you say, well, I want to learn how to get that drum tone. What kind of Ludwigs was he using in that castle at that time? And then you could say, I want to also learn what effects were being used when recording it, what mics, and how was it recorded and mastered. And
Yeah.
there's a lot into getting that sound other than just you know the player. It's the player, it's the drums, it's the mics, it's the engineer, it's everything. So if you really really want to be a nerd, you can kind of study all of those elements,
Right.
and then you get even closer to that beat that you love so much. And I think a lot of people focus maybe 85-90% on the drumming aspect of it, and then a little bit on the gear, the tones, like how to get whatever it is, 26 28-inch bass drum with no hole in it, get that sounding good. But then there's also, like you said, how many mics, where was it recorded, what mics, what gear did it run through, who engineered it, how did he EQ it and compress it, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, Like you have those epiphanies every now and then. I was obsessed with Chad Blake's drum sounds
Always,
on
dude.
all those, well, on everything he did, but especially the Los Lobos records and kind of that era.
Yep.
And I remember just out of the blue, I bought a bass DI and I bought one of those Sansamp bass drivers. And I had it for bass guitar because I had a mini studio in my house. So, yep, exactly. So I had that, and just messing around one day, I ran a microphone through that and as a mono mic and played my drums just to see what it sounded like. And I'm like, this sounds like Chad Blake. Oh my God. And then and I asked someone to go, oh, that's because he uses Sansamps on the drums. He uses those Tech 21, preamps to run his drums. I'm like, so I came at that backwards. I was just fooling around with guitar pedals.
Right.
And then I'm like, this sounds not the same, but it's got that sound that I like, that element. And I had to ask people, and they're like, oh, yeah, he does it. His thing is a version of what you're doing, a better version of what you're doing. But
Exactly. Yeah. Do you think there's a piece of gear, and that's been the most valuable to you? And it doesn't mean price, but if you really think about, like, okay, if I hadn't owned that one thing, I wouldn't be sitting in your room doing what you're doing right now.
good question. Man, I can't think of one piece of gear. That VS 880, I did a lot with that machine. And that was what made me say I need to upgrade, because I'm obviously maxing out what I can do on this machine.
Right.
So, and then I moved to a computer-based software at that point. I
Right.
got a Mac. Let me just show you a photo. I got a one of these guys when it came out, this iMac DV special, or whatever it's called.
Yep.
And I got this program. This is Opcode Studio Vision.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't even exist anymore. And you can.
That was pre Digio 1 kind of, or
Yeah. That was right before the Digio 1 came out. Yeah. So this was like there was like this and like Digital Performer. And so I got basically a computer setup that was a computer and a couple devices, a MIDI setup so I can program tracks, and I can record a little bit of audio. Just a little bit of audio, like maybe a lead vocal track or something, and I can mix it all together and bounce it down. Right. And so that's basically the infantile stage of what I do now, which is a computer where you can mix audio and virtual instruments and MIDI programming and everything. So it was probably that transition from using that VS 880 and recording tons of projects I was doing, like bands and demos and songwriting.
So let's talk about your room. So you moved to LA in 2004. Did you have a place to record immediately? Was that like a thing where you're like, I need a place to record when I move there? Tell me about the evolution of your space.
Yeah, I've always been like have this kind of 360 idea where I need to be able to practice, I need to be able to record, I need to be able to rehearse, I need to do all these things. I don't want to have any of those elements missing from what I'm doing. So when I moved to LA, the first thing I did was I rented a house in North Hollywood that had a lot of space in it, but no soundproofing. So I did have a 1 bedroom. It was a house with 3 bedrooms. So 1 bedroom was to sleep in, 1 was like a control room, and 1 was a drum room. And I did have the cops come quite a few times to knock on the door and say, "Hey, man, you got to knock it off. The neighbors are complaining." I'm like, "But I put egg foam up on the window." They're like, "Dude, it's so loud out here." So that made me say, like, I need to buy a place and soundproof it, because I was renting a home at the time. So then in 2000, I guess December 2005, I bought a house that had a guest house on the property, and I factored into the purchasing of the house, and I'm going to have to immediately also soundproof a room.
Right.
So I hired a studio builder to take this room and tear it down to the studs and rebuild it. So it basically cut out about 90% of the tone escaping. And now I can play at 2 a.m. and no cops.
Right.
So that was huge for me. It's big enough where I could have a rehearsal of a trio here, but I often don't do that. But it's more my place to either practice or record drums, and it's set up and kind of left that way. The mics are always set up. Even the preamp settings are kind of left where they are, unless I have to do something dramatically different, like a brush session or something. But yeah, it's soundproofed as far as like sound treated, I should say, like, with all the fiberglass panels and angled walls and ceiling and everything. But and this was, I moved in here, I guess, Christmas of 2005, and I think it was maybe built by about a year later we finished.
Okay. And then did you have most of your audio gear already? Or did that come once it was built? You're like, oh, now I think I could use this and I could use this. And,
Yeah, I think like we were saying, going with less, I think I had more before I moved here.
Really?
And I actually slimmed down.
Oh, wow.
Slimmed down and improved.
Wow.
Like, I mean, back when I was in Miami, I had just piles of gear, just that I couldn't fit anywhere. It was so I guess it's that thing of being in your early 20s and having jobs and not having any overhead. So
Right.
all I would do is just buy, I guess I'll buy an MPC 2000. I guess I'll buy this thing. I see everyone has a Moog. I'll buy a Moog, like it was weird. I mean, and then you get married and have kids and move to a city where things are more expensive. You're like, I guess I don't need any of this stuff. So you just start getting rid of stuff. And then I also learned that gear can be a distraction. So if you have too many options, you're never going to get anything done. So I'd rather just narrow it down to things that actually allow me to get things done very efficiently and productively. So I love getting rid of gear now. I don't like acquiring anything. I usually acquire something when something else breaks. My 80 device breaks. I'm like, what are some good 80 devices? So I get an Apollo instead or whatever. I upgrade when I need to. I don't buy things out of compulsion or curiosity anymore, just out of necessity.
And how often are you like changing drums, like full drum kit? Like, is it fairly minimal? Do you try to keep it, it's like, okay, I can make this work for this sound, or are you like, I'm tearing the whole thing down and setting up a new different kit?
Yeah, that is sometimes curiosity. Sometimes I want to hear what this drum set sounds like on this song, so I set it up if I have the time. Sometimes I don't have the time, so I just go with what I know will work. I know these toms will sound great on this song.
Right.
I usually get the song first, and I imagine a drum sound.
Yep.
So I'm like, oh, I'm hearing this. I hear something. And then I look at my collection of drums, and I say, what will get me, what kick? And I don't necessarily have to match the kick with the toms, with the snare, with me. I say, what kick will get me the sound I want? What toms will get me the sound I want? What snare drum? And, half the time I'm right immediately, and half the time I'm wrong. I'm like, ooh, these toms don't sound the way I thought they would on this song. Maybe I should switch to these. Or this snare drum, I thought this was going to be this vibe, but it's not working. I'm going to go to this vibe. And that's another great thing about having a home studio and being the engineer and the producer all at the same time is you're by yourself, so you can audition a lot of stuff. And my normal way of getting to the place where I'm good at track is kind of boring for other people. Because people ask me, hey, can I just video chat with you while you're doing the session? I'm like, it's boring. You can, but you're going to be watching me just move stuff around for hours. Right. Because what I do is I basically set up the kit that I think will sound good on this song.
Yep.
And I record it. And then I listen to it. And I'm like, And I move some mics around and I change the tuning. I'm like, And then I switch out the bass drum. I put in another bass drum. I switch out the snare drum. I put in another snare drum. Change the hi-hats. Change the ride. Retune the rack tom. and I record every version of this. When I'm smart, I label everything. Sometimes I don't, but sometimes I'm like, this is the song with the acrolite. This is the song with the DW wood snare drum. This is and then
Oh, so you'll go back and A/B.
and then I A/B all the stuff until I hear a drum sound that I'm like, yeah, that's the one I want. And it's a combination.
Okay. Because once I go like, no, that's not the one, I delete that take. I'm like, I'm out of here.
No, I keep everything because sometimes I get further and further away where I'm like now lost. I'm like, I'm like this. Everything sounds like garbage to me. Let me go to the top again. I go to the first take. I'm like, that wasn't that bad after all. Maybe I should go back to that idea of using the Noble and Cooley snare. That wasn't as awful as I thought it sounded in the beginning. That sounds pretty good now because maybe you need perspective. So I'll try out, 2 bass drums, 2 sets of toms, and 6 snare drums before I'm happy. But when I get the thing I like, then I lock it in. I'm like, that's the kit I'm using for this song. Right. And then I do like 3 takes of me playing that song. Right. And then I usually, pick the best of those 3 takes. But it's the auditioning process takes forever. And the actual playing the drums is like 1, 2, 3.
Right. So you're making sure, I love this point. You're making sure that the drums sound right. You're not doing this in Pro Tools. You're not trying to re-EQ or whatever. You're just like, the rack tom's not right. I'm changing out the rack tom. End of story.
Well, this is a thing that it just comes from. We talked about this like a little while ago. That what's strange is that you can put, I don't know, 8 drummers together that are all really, really good friends and all record at home, and we all have completely different ways of doing things. Our workflows are different, just because being a home recording drummer is a very solitary thing. Right. So we all come up with our own ways of doing things. Right. So I've come up with my own ways of doing things, and a lot of what I do has very little EQing or affecting. Okay. I developed a style which is just, I want almost everything to come from the dry drums, Mm-hmm. But I'm transitioning into getting more and more into the affecting the drums, but that's after I record them.
Sure.
And that's thanks to people like you and Luke Adams and stuff who I lean on for like things like, like I went over Luke's another great drummer friend of ours, and I went over his house once and we just talked about gating for like an hour. Mm-hmm. Because I don't like gating. I don't like gating the drums, but gating sounds amazing. I just didn't like it. I didn't like doing it. I didn't like the sound I was getting. And he showed me how you can do it and make it sound incredible. So now I'm all about gating, but I do that after, of course. I never do that. No, you don't either. I'm sure we don't do that to tape, but
you got to be really careful because it will kill your take, or it will kill your sound if all of a sudden you're under the velocity. Yeah. You're like, that was the take. Oh shit. I played quieter and yeah.
So, my process is I do everything with mic position, drum tuning, drum selection, and playing. That's where I get the majority of my takes from. And then when I'm done and I'm super happy with the take, then I put on my engineering hat and I sit down, I start to fiddle. Yep. And that's a newer thing for me. I used to send people just dry drums all the time. I said, you're the engineer, you deal with it. Right. But now, because I'm a little more curious and more interested in the engineering side of drumming, the mixing engineering, not the recording engineer, the mixing engineering side of it, I'm into hearing what these plugins do to drums. And it's helping me understand even more like how to get the finished sound that I want. Yeah. Like bus compression is cool, and parallel compression is cool. And I thought everything was just either you throw something on the snare or you take it off the snare. But now I realize the way you combine mics and, compress groupings is different also. And it's very fascinating to me, what that can do to your drum sound. Yeah. So again, my process normally when I'm recording for someone is I get the song, I learn the song. We talked about all the auditioning and recording and stuff. I get it all down to where I'm ready to send it to somebody. And at that point, I usually send them an MP3 bounce. And I say, here you go. Here's your masterpiece with my drums added to it. Are you happy? And they're like, in 9 times out of 10, they're like, dude, thank you. And sometimes like, love it. Can you do a different fill going into the bridge that mimics the guitar melody? And I'm like, oh yeah, totally, absolutely. And I'll just either retake it or do a punch or something. And then I prepare the drums, and I just send a WeTransfer file with all the files, and I'm like, there you go. That's your drum stuff. And but sometimes they'll be like, a lot of times I don't send the Pro Tools session. I just send them the files.
Right.
But sometimes they're like, I really, really want your panning. And I'm like, okay, you like the way it sounds panned? Okay, I'll send you my Pro Tools session. Or I really, really want to know how you processed it.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you can either send them the Pro Tools session so they can see what you're doing, or you can, like, I know sometimes you bounce stems, so you can say, well, this is what it sounds like as a stereo track. You can either use this or you can copy this.
Right.
And so that's why I decided to get a little more into the mixing engineering side of drumming, is because now I sense more and more of that happening, where people aren't like your grade A famous mixing engineers doing stuff. This is people doing records in their bedrooms, and they don't know how to deal with 12 mics of drums.
Right.
So maybe you can help them by either compressing the things that are supposed to be compressed, or bouncing the things and stemming the things that should be, or because it's not going to sound as good as the day that you sent it to them. They're just going to do a worse job than you do. And you're like, I should probably help them with this, because I don't want it to sound bad in the end either. So maybe I'll help them by pre-mixing it for them in some way. So that's why I started getting into that.
You print a track from them of your mix?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes I just send them the MP3 of the full mix of the song and my individual tracks. And then if I say, oh, they might need some help, maybe I'll print the drums by themselves with the effects on them. If they still need help, maybe I'll print the individual tracks with the effects on them. So I'm like, this is the room mics with the stuff on it, with the icing.
Right.
And it all depends on, like you said, it depends on who you're sending it to, and you start to learn that. Some engineers, they're like, I want everything dry because I'm going to do everything because I'm an expert. Like, great, you're better than I am. And other guys are like, dude, I would have no idea how to, mix 8 or 16 tracks of drums. Can you do it for me? So then you just do it for them, and they just drop it in, and then they're happy.
How many mics are you usually recording? Like, what's the maximum number of mics you'll record, as opposed to?
I'm set up to do 16.
Okay, and do you do that all the time? Do you do 16?
Yeah, usually I do 16 all the time, because, for a number of reasons. Because I like 3 toms, so I have 2 floor toms. Sure, so that's one reason. I know you normally play a 4-piece kit, I think. So I normally play a 5-piece kit. So there's that. But if I were to run it down nerd-wise, what I'm doing is, at the moment, I'm doing 3 kick drum mics.
Yep.
That is inside the hole, outside the hole, facing the head, and a sub. So 3 mics on your kick, you're already going overboard. But I do that because I have the ability.
Yeah.
So I could do that with 1 kick mic. I do 3 snare mics, which is also overkill. Okay. But top mic, bottom mic, and then I mic the sides of the snare shell.
For every track, you do that, no matter what?
For every track, and I will always mute it if it doesn't work.
Sure. Okay.
Record it, it's there, and then when I'm sending it, I'm like, there is no need for all of this stuff, and I'll just send them only 8 of them. But I record like 3 snare mics, 3 kick mics. I have tops of 3 toms, so that's tom 1, 2, and 3. I have a hi-hat mic. I have stereo overheads that are right over the cymbals. Mm-hmm. I have stereo room. Okay. And then I have a mono mic. That's it's not the mono in between the overheads like we were talking about, you and I, about a month ago, but it's the kind that's kind of in front of the bass drum, maybe 4 feet high, like that mono mic. Sometimes it can be closer where it's like floating over the bass drum shell.
So you move that around for the particular sound.
Usually I move it around with, you know what it is? It's usually how much ride cymbal I want, because that mic gets a lot of ride cymbal. So I'm like, oh, this is too much ride, and I move it back a little bit. Right. If I want a lot of kick snare interaction, I don't play ride on that song, I'll move it closer to that space that's kind of like near the bass drum shell and the rack tom and the that
Right.
magic spot that people use. And then right now, that left me with one extra mic input. So right now, there's a bullet mic on the floor right by the batter side of the bass drum.
Yep.
And that gets a nice little crunchy loop sound. Before that, I was using, there's a bathroom over there. I was miking up the bathroom.
Yep.
And I was getting this weird, like, when the levee breaks really far away sound. But I didn't, you know, I loved it for a while, and then I got bored with that. I'm like, is that really useful?
I think a lot of this stuff is phases too. Like you use it for 6 months, and then you kind of fall into something new. You're like, oh, somebody tried that, I want to try that, and then you stick with that, or you get tired of it, or you're like, yeah, or maybe you go back and listen to something. Sometimes I'll go back to what I did 2 years ago for a reference or something, and then I go like oh man, thank God it's better now. You know what I mean? Or what was that I did?
It's good that we're getting better, that you and I are getting better. I think I could do.
That's what I tell myself anyway.
I've started doing something which I started a couple of years ago, but I think it helps a lot. Is say I'm sending wave files to someone. I'm really specific with what I name each wave file now.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if I do, say I do 12 tracks of drums, those are called D period and then whatever it is. So they start with a prefix of an initial, like D period, hi-hat left. So they know that also the panning perspective.
Oh, wow.
So if I have a stereo overhead left, stereo overhead right, they know that the hi-hat is also going to be coming out of the left side.
Okay.
So they don't put the hi-hat on the other side thinking that it's, audience perspective, and then the hi-hat and the overhead are doing that, So I label in the track what instrument, like what group of instruments is going to be. This is your drums,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the panning of it, the bottom snare or whatever. And then if I do overdubs, I label the overdubs as a different group. If I do tambourines and shakers and stuff, I go P period shaker, P period tambourine. So when they do a batch dump into their computer, everything alphabetizes into groups. So they get all the drums in a group of tracks, and then all the percussion in a group of tracks. And then if I do more overdubs, maybe I'll go OD period marching snare,
Mm-hmm.
OD period boomy concert bass drum or whatever. So they don't think the bass drum and the snare drum are part of the drum set track, and they try to mix it in there somehow. So that's something I learned, and I think that helps a lot. I've never talked with anyone else about that, if you do something similar, but it helps me when I do a lot of tracks, and a lot of them are overdubs, that when they just do an import audio, it goes grrr and lines up.
Yeah.
So kind of, they don't have to figure out like, what is this thing called auxiliary snare? What is that? They know immediately where it's going to go. Another thing I do is I also I learned this from an engineer a long time ago, which I don't know if you feel this way or not, but he taught me that if you can send your drums and they sound good in unity, that's going to be a lot better than having everyone have to drop certain tracks 12 dB to make it sound good. Like I used to record my room mics and my hi-hat mic and my bottom snare mic. They were all at the same level as my kick mic and everything else, because I wanted to see a proper level as a waveform. So I knew I was, I had validation. Everything's being recorded properly.
Mm-hmm.
But then you put everything on, it's like, and you have to duck a lot of tracks.
Right.
So this engineer says, don't be afraid to take that hi-hat mic and make it like super small, because you're not going to want a lot of that. And so I have everything kind of in my gain staging and in my preamps where some tracks don't look loud.
Right.
But I'm now confident doing that because maybe it's because it's a digital platform, but that when I send people tracks, they don't have to reach for the volume knobs on anything. It's all going to sound good already. And then, they can tweak as they go. Yeah, we were talking the other day, you and I, about phase, and you said, "Oh, that'd be an interesting thing to talk about." Which is that, like, I was watching one of your videos from Sticks and Wires, and you were talking about how you have a plug-in, and you often audition the phase button to see what sounds good, and sometimes even out of phase actually sounds good, and in phase doesn't, and you lose something. And I was watching and saying, maybe I should do that more often, because what I do is I normally listen to the tracks and I just flip. I go into Audio Suite and choose the one of the invert option. I just flip audio tracks back and forth until I think they sound good, and I zoom in sometimes and stare at the sine waves. But I'll definitely flip things back and forth that way and not use the plugin. And I'm thinking maybe the plugin's probably a quicker way to do that. What about different plugins delaying your tracks different amounts? Like I found that I'm getting much better at knowing how to deal with this. But when I first started using lots of different plugins, say you had a top and bottom snare mic or 2 kick mics, and you throw a plugin on one kick mic, now that kick mic is out of sync with the other kick mic.
Right.
So what I've learned is if I'm gonna put anything on one mic, I put it on the other one, even if it's bypassed.
Right.
Exactly. But if I have 2 snare mics or 3 snare mics and I want to put a decapitator on the top of the snare mic, I put it on all 3 and then I bypass the other 2. So now they're actually basically delayed compensation the same way.
Yeah.
You have to do that?
Totally. I do that. Yes. And conversely, Eric Valentine taught me one thing where you can actually with like kick mics, if they're in a similar frequency, you actually delay one by somewhere between 8 and 15 milliseconds, and it actually opens the sound up. So the transients aren't landing at the same time because they're fighting each other. So you delay one, and all of a sudden it totally opens the sound up. He showed me that, and I was like, oh, I thought that was amazing. So yes, sometimes that delay compensation thing totally needs to happen where you're putting the decapitator on all 3 tracks or whatever. And then sometimes it actually opens up the sound in a very strange way. Yeah.
I've noticed it's that kind of thing where I've heard a lot of friends say the bypass button is your friend, because the best way to figure out what works and what doesn't work is to try it, bypass it, try it, bypass it. And I found a lot of times I've read that people do this. I've read that people do this. I've read it. And every time I do it, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So I'm like, wait, it's not just a matter of throwing plugins on because you read someone did it. You have to know how to do it. You have to know, how to do it properly, the settings, whatever. And so I've learned through experience how to get a much better drum sound with a ton of plugins on there. At first, it was either the dry drums sound good and the plug-in drums sound all messed up. But now I've gotten to the point where I understand what each one's doing to the sound and how it's improving it or detracting from what it used to be. And but that's a learning curve. Let me tell you a story about how like they have those classic sessions that go around, these bootleg sessions that people do where they you'll often, like, someone say, hey dude, I have a couple Queen songs on Pro Tools, and you get together and you can listen to them, and there's the Marvin Gaye ones, and there's so many now, and I guess they come from people backing up and like doing libraries of old tapes or something, and they just kind of go around as this bootleg thing. I heard a Bob Marley one, and I was always fascinated with how to get that drum sound,
This and Kaya, those sounds.
I guess it was like, I can't remember which song it was now, but it was obviously Carlton Barrett and that snare. That snare is like, it sounds like a timbale, but it wasn't a timbale because everything I said is like, no, it's a Ludwig Superphonic. Or
what I've been trying to figure out for years.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, because I had to, I'm like, you know what? Let me hear it. And I'm hearing the drums, and obviously everything all together sounds like a Bob Marley recording. I'm like, can I just hear the drums? I'm listening to the drums. I'm like, can I just hear the mics? And there's only like 3 mics in this whatever session that they have, and it could be like stereo overhead and snare. And you listen to stereo overhead, and it sounds like a drum set, right? Right. And then there's a snare mic that is just distorted beyond belief. Like, so every time he hears a doom, that kind of like, that blending in. So it's the close mic that is just pulverized, that is giving you that awesome mix with the regular natural drum sound that is jumping out like that, which is why those rim clicks and those snare drum rim shot fills sound so much like a timbali.
Yeah, because there's still a snare sound in there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's way thinner than like a snare. And like I've taken my Supraphonic and pinged it as high as I possibly can. I'm like, it can't go any higher, and it still doesn't seem. It's not there.
I think what you do is you have to take a separate like snare top mic and just bury it in a Sans amp or a something,
Right.
and then you blend that in. And I think that is, I mean, that's what it sounded like to me, how they got that classic reggae drum sound that everyone does with a timbali now.
Right.
That's what it is.
That's interesting because the hi-hats, especially on Exodus, the whole record, are like the high end on those things are like sizzling.
Mm-hmm.
They're, to get away with that is pretty difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously the hi-hat in those rhythms is like one of the most important things, but the tone of those things is like, woo, and that's probably exactly where that's coming from. It's that snare mic that's just like
Mm-hmm.
gunned. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered a few things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a pleasure.
This is awesome. Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know what's going on,
Carter, man, at this point,
yeah, Blair said, Blair and I are really good friends, but he said, hey, why don't we do a video chat about home studios? I'm like, sounds great. I got nothing to do this week. Let's do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's awesome. We should do this every day.
Well, I don't know if everyone's going to listen to it all the time, but we will definitely do it some more. All right, man. Well, have a great day. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime.
Yeah. All right, dude. We'll have coffee soon.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Right on.